Interlude. A chrysanthemum in winter. When the sword fails, the silk holds. The true history of an empire is not written in its proclamations, but in the quiet whispers of its women. Autumn, 1943. Tokyo. An austere, penetrating chill had settled into the bones of the Aoyama apartment. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chill of a city holding its breath. The silence was broken by the distant, pulsing wail of an air raid siren beginning its daily test, a sound that coiled in the pit of the stomach and never truly left. She had just returned from a week in Kyoto visiting her family, and the cultural transition back to the wartime capital felt more jarring than ever. From the small, crackling wireless set in her sitting room, a melody of haunting, almost unbearable sorrow drifted through the apartment. Shio Masaru's famous 1939 recording, Kudan no Haha. The song told the story of a mother making a pilgrimage to the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo's Kudan district, a sacred place where the spirits of fallen soldiers were enshrined. Though sung by a man, the song had been transformed by the war into the very voice of patriotic motherhood. Its sentimental, heartbreaking melody was a constant presence on civilian broadcasts, a shared national grief, a quiet hymn for the hundreds of thousands of sons who would never come home. For Fumiko, whose own son was now a naval officer fighting in the seas for war she knew was already lost, the song was a quiet torment, a nightly eulogy for a sacrifice that had not yet been made. She poured herself a cup of tea. It was a bitter, smoky brew made from scorched twigs and whatever leaves the merchants could find, the taste of scarcity. In her hands she held several folded, tissue-thin pages, a hand-copied manuscript of the opening chapters of Junichiro Tanizaki's new, and already suppressed, serialized story. It was not a tale of war or glory, but something far more fragile, passed from one trusted friend to another in the old capital like a secret prayer. The Makioka sisters. She wasn't reading. She was simply thinking of them, of the 4 sisters of Osaka, and feeling a poignant and sorrowful kinship. We are all Makioka sisters now, she thought, trying to preserve a world of beauty that is being washed away by a harsher tide. She thought of the second sister, Sachiko, and her quiet, desperate efforts to maintain the elegance of her household, to find a suitable match for the painfully shy and traditional Yukiko. All while the world outside their garden walls grew louder and more vulgar. In Kyoto, the world of the Makioka sisters still made a kind of desperate sense. It was a city trying to pretend the war was a distant, vulgar affair. There, time was still measured by the annual pilgrimage to see the weeping cherry blossoms, the very ritual the sisters clung to as their world dissolved. By the subtle weave of a new obi, by the precise angle of a bow. It was a world built for a woman like Yukiko, a city that could still appreciate her quiet, retiring grace as the highest form of beauty. Fumiko looked out at the Tokyo sky, its haze smudged with the harsh, metallic smell from the arsenals. But here, she thought, a sepulchral hollow settling in her heart. Here there is no room for a Yukiko. To find a moment of refuge from the city's vulgar energy, she had attended a rare No performance at the Imperial Theatre, a quiet island of ancient tradition in a sea of patriotic fervour. The play was Funa Benkei, an episode she knew from the epic tales. As she watched the drama unfold on the monolithic, polished stage, the connection was almost too painful to bear. She saw the loyal warrior Benkei, bound by an unbreakable giri to his master Yoshitsune, as they fled from a treacherous brother. when the vengeful ghost of the defeated Taira warrior rose from the waves, a ghost from the very war her father had invoked from the tale of the Heike, she saw not just a historical spectre, but a metaphor for her own life. She saw her husband, Takeshi, as Benkei, a man of immense strength and loyalty, bound to a distant master, forever haunted by the ghosts of a war he did not start. Tokyo was a city of men in uniform, of war bonds and victory slogans. A city where endless funerals for boys her son's age were hailed as national triumphs. It was the city of her husband, Takeshi, a man of brilliant, mercenary, and silent systems. It was the will of Tokyo, she knew, that had forged her own son, Takeo, in the crucibles of the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy, and had now sent him, a newly minted sub-lieutenant, into the inferno of the South Pacific. She imagined his hands, once delicate enough to learn the art of calligraphy, now gripping the brittle, salt-sprayed steel of a destroyer's railing. She feared Tokyo was grinding the poetry from his soul. In this city, beauty was not in the subtle shadow of a temple eve, it was in the gleam of a polished cannon. Value was not in the centuries-old patina of a tea-bowl, it was in the tonnage of a new battleship. She remembered a trip to the magnificent Mitsukoshi department store in Nihonbashi just before the war. A world of exquisite silks, art exhibitions, and a quiet, refined elegance. Now, she knew, its grand halls were filled with displays of military uniforms and patriotic slogans, its refined clientele replaced by grim-faced officials. The men of this city had no time for the delicate, time-consuming rituals that gave life its meaning in Kyoto. They were too busy building an empire of steel. She finally smoothed the pages, her finger tracing the delicate characters. She did not know how the sisters' story would end, the censors had seen to that, but she understood the essential marrow from the very first lines. In Tanizaki's elegant prose, she saw a world she knew in her bones, a world of quiet rituals and unspoken beauty, a world already besieged by the harsh static of modernity. She, Fumiko Katsura, was trying to survive in the very furnace of a world at war. She was a woman of Kyoto, a guardian of its fragile, poetic soul, living in exile in the capital of a new and terrible Japan. Winter, 1944. Gotemba. But a guardian cannot merely watch, she must protect. A week later, Fumiko crossed the invisible threshold into the snow country of Gotemba. The train felt like a thread passing through darkness, emerging into the endless white of the snow country. Inside the imperial villa, the silence was not peaceful. It was the unreal stillness of a mirror, cold, brittle, and waiting for a single blow to shatter it. Fumiko knelt on the tatami, her head bowed in a protocol of absolute submission. She was the older gear in the machine, her joints stiffened by decades of courtly observation. Yet she yielded to the princess with a precision that age had only sharpened. In this room, rank was the unmoving law. No matter how many years Fumiko had lived, she remained the servant. No matter how young Setsuko was, she remained the sun around which the household turned. The room smelled of medicinal steam and the antiseptic scent of pine. Princess Setsuko sat opposite her, looking thinner, a wasting beauty that reminded Fumiko of a moth beating against a lantern. In the adjacent room, the sound of a dry, racking cough tore through the paper screens like a saw on bone. Setsuko's hands trembled slightly as she whisked the tea. It was a thin, pale brew. "The snow is deep this year, Fumiko-san," Setsuko said softly. her voice carrying the fathomless, cultured diction of the high aristocracy. She whisked the tea with trembling hands, producing a thin, pale brew whose taste bore the thinness of wartime austerity and stagnant air. "It makes the road to Tokyo seem very long." "The road is difficult, Highness," Fumiko replied, her bow a perfect angle of submission. "But the snow also covers many things. It cleanses the earth, hiding the scars of the world beneath a veil of silence." Setsuko set the bowl down. Her eyes, reflected in the pale liquid, seemed to hold a cold, distant light. "Do you remember when I first arrived from Washington? The court ladies whispered that I was too modern. They said I walked too fast and spoke too loudly." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You were the only one who didn't judge me. You told me that a pine tree can grow in any soil, if its roots are strong." "I remember, Highness," Fumiko said, her voice leveled. "I recognized a fellow exile. We perform the ancient rites of the court, Highness, yet we are tethered to the world of the tangible." "And now look at us," Setsuko whispered, the smile vanishing. "The doctors speak of spirit. They speak of the Yamato Damashi. But spirit is a beautiful, wasted effort, Fumiko. It cannot stop the bacteria in his lungs." She looked at the closed screen door, her eyes rimmed with red that dry. "The army controls the hospitals, and they hoard the medicine for their own generals while the emperor's brother coughs his life away." Fumiko reached into the capacious sleeve of her kimono. She did not bring out the vial immediately. She brought out a small box wrapped in a fukusa, a silk cloth of imperial purple, embroidered with the Katsura crest. She placed it on the tatami and slid it across the space between them. "My husband's family has friends in the south," Fumiko murmured. "They trade in goods that do not exist on official manifests. They trade in new sciences. Science from the West? Science that does not care about flags, Highness," Fumiko corrected gently. "It is a mold from the Americas. It is said to eat the fire in the blood." Setsuko's hand hovered over the silk. To accept enemy medicine was technically treason. But she was a woman who had lived in the West. She knew the war was not a clash of gods, but of nations. "Why?" she whispered. "Your husband. He has suffered under the gaze of the Kempeitai. Why bring this to us?" Fumiko did not speak of transactions. She spoke of duty. "Because my husband wishes to serve," she said. "He manages the logistics for Mr. Fujiwara with absolute loyalty. But there are hawks in the army. They do not distinguish between the emperor's private servants and their own supplies. They seize his planes. They take his fuel. They clip the wings of the bird that tries to fly for you." She bowed her head lower, her forehead touching the mat. "He cannot bring the spring thaw to this villa, Highness, if his hands are bound by General Tojo's bureaucrats." Setsuko looked at the vial. She knew that by accepting it, she was accepting a weight heavier than the silk of her robes. It was an a debt of life, that bound the Chrysanthemum throne to a merchant's house. "The army is overzealous," Setsuko said, her voice gaining a sudden steel-like edge. "They forget that the imperial household has its own necessities, its own logistics." She covered the vial with her hand, pulling it close to her body. "Your husband requires a designation that reflects his true loyalty," Setsuko said. "If his company were designated a Goyotashi, a purveyor to the imperial household ministry, his assets would be sacrosanct. No army officer would dare requisition property marked with the Chrysanthemum seal." Fumiko remained bowed. "That would allow him to serve with a free heart." Setsuko looked at the closed door where the prince lay dying. "The seal will be issued tonight. Tell your husband, the snow is deep, but the path is now open.